thanks everyone for attending this call. We have a very interesting call ahead, especially because we have a huge moment of Q&A. So we'll get to all of your curiosities and your questions. But before that, let's get some context. So with you, Jane, please.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. So yeah, just to check in with people, if you've not used Zoom before, we are using the chat, which you can find in the little sort of speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. So we're using that to say hello, and that's where we're going to be stacking our questions. So we're going to hear from a few speakers today, and we're going to be recording our questions in the chat, just because it will help us spot some themes and pick up those questions when we get to the time, because we're expecting it to be quite a lively discussion, hopefully later. So welcome to this Q session. We're really excited to welcome Brendan and Sue and Peter, who are going to talk about their experiences of working with this approach, the barriers that they've experienced, and some of the solutions that they've generated to overcome those barriers. I think it's really exciting to actually hear from people that are not working with the theory. They're actually, they've got the t-shirts, they have eaten the pies, they have really experienced all of the challenges that this kind of way of working can bring, and all of the advantages and joys, and maybe found some new things that the original Buurtzorg didn't even imagine when you apply it in these different contexts. So although this is always a seminar about reimagining things and new things, I think what's really interesting as well about this particular way of working is how long it's been around. So this isn't a kind of a newfangled approach anymore. It doesn't feel like this. It feels like something that has really been tried and tested in lots of different countries and in lots of different contexts. So I want to give us as much time as possible to hear from our experts and to ask questions and have a chat. So I think, am I handing over to Brendan, I think, first? Is that right, Brendan?
Yes, I think so. And thank you, Jane. And thank you, everybody. Can you all hear me? Jane, you can hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, and thank you, Jane. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Q community, Matthew, Joriam, everyone for putting this session together. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to be quite brief because I do want to maximize the time available for questions and discussion. Just a little bit of background on the project itself. It started in 2017, was interrupted, of course, by COVID, like everything else. And the project is called TIC. That means Transforming Integrated Care in the Community. And its objective was to bring together organisations in Britain, in our case in Kent, Kent Community Health Foundation Trust, Kent County Council, and Medway Community Health, together with organisations in Belgium and France, with the support of Buurtzorg in the Netherlands, to explore the barriers and challenges to the reproduction in other countries in the EU, of the spectacular success of Buurtzorg itself since it was founded in 2006, and since when it has grown to be the largest and most successful provider.
Just didn't work for me. Seriously.
Okay. The largest and most successful provider of community services in the Netherlands, and a global exemplar, I think it's fair to say, of the ways of working and organizational design based around self-managed teamwork of professionals. And we wanted to explore in this project what were the barriers and challenges and what could we learn about overcoming them to replicate the extraordinary success of Buurtzorg in terms of very high levels of care quality, very high levels of job satisfaction and staff retention, and very high levels of cost efficiency, reflected in a reduction by about half in the Netherlands, in Buurtzorg, of the number of hours of professional care on average per client, at the same time as improved care quality. And you can find out all about Buurtzorg's achievement, obviously, in lots of other ways, and you probably know a lot about it anyway if you're here. We in the project itself, what we did was support and enable the participating partners to experiment by establishing teams to work in the Buurtzorg way, and to explore what were the organizational conditions of success to enable them to really prosper. And through the project, we identified, collected together in the report, and you can find the report, you'll receive a link to the report in the follow-up from this meeting. We identified around 250 specific barriers and challenges that were encountered by the various partners in Britain and in Kent and France, and to a lesser extent in Belgium, over the 4 or 5 years of the project, and how those participating partners tried to overcome them. Some couldn't overcome them. Some of the challenges could be overcome, some couldn't. Some organizations found that they ran out of steam trying to overcome them. Others really learned a very great deal, and we're going to be hearing from Peter and Sue in a minute about what they learned and what they did. The barriers and challenges we identified really boiled down, as you'll see in the report, to 4 categories. One was barriers relating to any kind of change. We're all familiar with those. Change is difficult. A second category was to do with the current environment for nursing and care generally, challenges of staff recruitment, funding, etc. Again, these are generic challenges, not particularly related to Buurtzorg specifically. A third category, however, was related to the model itself. How do professionals working in quite hierarchical environments and various institutional arrangements which are different from those in the Netherlands, how do they learn to self-manage, for example? What is it? What are the challenges that they encounter in trying to work in the same way as Buurtzorg teams work in the Netherlands? And here, I think we, through the project, were able to learn a great deal about what that involves, to develop and improve our approach, and to overcome many of those challenges. And I think that's reflected in the steadily improved way that we've been able to support the development of teams over the project, and indeed beyond the project. But the fourth and very much largest and most widespread set of challenges related to the reality of institutional contexts in which Buurtzorg values, culture, and goals are not widely shared. And this was reflected in approaches to leadership and organizational processes and structures. To put it simply, what we were trying to do was fit a square peg into a round hole, institutionally and organizationally and systemically. And this manifested itself in 4 main ways. Firstly, in performance indicators that did not support Buurtzorg's outcomes or the Buurtzorg way of achieving them. Secondly, in structural barriers, whether they be sectoral or geographic, that got in the way of genuinely place-based integration of service at neighborhood level. Thirdly, hierarchical or competitive cultures and processes within organizations, which clearly undermine the professional autonomy of the nurses and care workers themselves. And fourthly, everyday demands on the teams to comply with the requirements of the systems in which they worked, rather than those systems adapting to their professional needs. And the participants in the project, the partners, went about overcoming these challenges in, again, we've identified sort of 4 categories of ways they did that. One was to just, compromise, go along with the systemic arrangements as they were and do their very best. Another was to find some workarounds, very creative in many cases. Another was to create a sort of bubble in which alternative systems could be developed. And fourthly, to try to build on such bubbles to really change the organizational and institutional environment itself. In other words, rather than trying to get the professionals and the work they do to adapt to the systems, to try to get the systems to adapt to the needs of the model and of the professionals to work with greater freedom and responsibility. And I think that's the lesson of the project is in some ways expressed well in something that Buurtzorg's founder, Jos de Blok, has said about Buurtzorg's wider international experience of attempts to apply the Buurtzorg model in various countries. What he has said is the lesson every time is to start again from the patient perspective and simplify the systems. But that in itself, I think, presents all the same challenges that we've encountered in endeavoring to do it in Britain. Because the way you go about simplifying the systems and changing the systems is itself an expression of the barriers to the adoption of a model which is based on starting with the needs of individuals of people needing support and care, starting with their aspirations and goals, enabling them to self-manage their care as much as possible and draw on the resources and strengths and assets in their community, and creating conditions for those communities to look after themselves more effectively with professional help. And to do that means really continually experimenting, to learn from experience of trying new things, as Buurtzorg has done, to continually try to draw the lessons of that experimentation to learn and improve. And that's not a question of top-down or bottom-up change, or starting with operational change in the teams or with systemic change in leadership, but actually needs to involve everybody throughout the system. The individuals and communities being served, the professionals, excuse me, the professionals that serve and support them, and the organizations that should be dedicated to serving and supporting them rather than trying to command and control them. And that, I think, is the key lesson. It's not a question of taking Buurtzorg's methods, many of which are very useful, and we support organizations to learn them. But the key lesson, going back to something that Jane said in introducing this session, is that actually 16 years after Buurtzorg was founded, we have a different situation. And we can, by applying the fundamental lessons of the mindsets, the cultures, the approach and the vision that gave rise to Buurtzorg and its incredible success, we can achieve things that Buurtzorg itself has not imagined. And that's the message I'd like to leave you with, because I think that's really the core lesson of this project. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you very much, Brendan. So I think next, so again, please record your questions in the chat thread, and we'll keep a tab on those and then come back to them all at the end, if that's okay. So I think next we're going to move to Sue.
Yeah, hello everyone, nice to see you all. I'm Sue Wilson. I'm the AD for local care in Medway Community Healthcare. I've been a nurse for a really long time. So I worked in the acute initially and then moved over to the community when I got a bit disillusioned with the acute, where my role was mainly about numbers and beds and not so focused on patient care. So I came into the community and I was part of the project with Brendan and Peter on the call from 2017. It was a very interesting project to participate in, but what really struck me was a term that they use in Buurtzorg, it's very much retro innovation. So some of this that we talk about today, for those of you who have been in the health and care sector for some period of time, will see it as how perhaps some ways we used to work like this in the past. So it's not new, it's just bringing some of the ways of how the community used to work and support patients in the community back online. And the innovation obviously reflects to the digital aspects, but the digital aspects we experienced out in the Netherlands were extremely smart and extremely intuitive. And I'm not sure about your experience with digital in the NHS. I'm not sure that we're there yet with that approach. They also used a system called Omaha, which is a nursing taxonomy. If any of you are interested in looking it up, it's something I'd like to see very much introduced into the UK, as so far we try and overlay on our systems something that works similar, but the digital aspect was really interesting when we were working out there. I'd just like to say, although we are implementing the principles of Buurtzorg, we're not there yet. This is a huge journey. There's massive cultural change, both internally within organisations, but also, as Brendan alluded to, externally as well. Not least our hierarchical system that's evolved in the NHS, which has become naturally more hierarchical with the pandemic, when we had to go into some command and control to manage a very challenging situation for all, but even previously to that. So undoing the hierarchical perspective can be a challenge sometimes. But the value very much is taking back to the patient and centering truly on the patient. And more for me also is about enabling nurses to do the job we train them for, and to be valued as autonomous practitioners who do know what's best for their patients. And it's not about tasks. We become very task orientated, reflected by demands for increased activity. So everything's been focused on task rather than a holistic approach to care, which we are obviously very much focused on reintroducing, because we know that the task approach is just, well, from my perception, just generated more demand, because we are not dealing with the core and wider issues some of our patients and families have. So for me, a huge amount of learning. I'm going to stop there because I'm sure you've got lots of questions, and yeah, look forward to some questions from you.
Thanks, Sue. And we are still collecting those questions in the chat thread. I think we're now going to move to Peter.
Hi everyone, great to be here today. Thanks to the community for putting this on. Yeah, I just want to add to what Brendan and Sue have said. Really, this has been a huge project. So for us in Kent Community Health, we're an NHS Foundation Trust. We had over 1,000 staff involved. 100 teams have taken part in the programme and adopted Buurtzorg methods. But I do agree with what Brendan said. It's not so much about teams, actually. It's about systems that those teams work in, and those systems currently do not serve patients or staff as well as they could. So just to give you some things we did, you know, Buurtzorg had the advantage that they started from a greenfield site. It was for nurses, community nurses, sitting around a kitchen table who basically said, this doesn't work, let's try something different. So very experimental, and then they grew because they were obviously getting lots of things right. In the NHS, we've got, you know, lots of organisational inertia. It's not greenfield, it's brownfield. So we've got lots of systems, ways of doing things that need to be changed to make this work. Some of our successes where we actually managed to change our scheme of delegation in our organisation. So before it was very bandist. It was very much, you need to be a band X to do this task. You need to be a band X to do that task. We changed that, which was a huge undertaking. Went through all the governance meetings, as you can imagine. So that frees up a lot of bureaucracy and puts more power lower down the organisation in the hands of teams. we were able to introduce team dashboards like they used in Buurtzorg. So that has operational data around patients, but it also includes quality information and staffing information. And again, it's about democratizing data so that teams can use data to make decisions, just as they do in the Netherlands. We also had a huge program which we called Rock, Paper, Scissors, which was about stripping out bureaucracy, just trying to make it easier for nurses to get on with nursing. You know, as Sue and Brendan have both said, you know, nurses know how to nurse. They're professionals, they're experts in nursing. What they don't want to do is waste, as they would say it, waste their time away from patients on, you know, form filling and you know, getting support for the things they need to do. So we had a huge program where we cut red tape, we made things simpler, we cut a huge number of policies, just tried to take the burden off, the admin burden off, really. I just want to say something about being in the NHS. I'm sure many of you are in the NHS. Some things have unintended consequences. So what I mean by that is, from NHS England, we have a directive to reduce office estate and make things as efficient as possible. So, which I agree with, it's public money. We need to be very careful with public money. But for us, that meant that teams were not always close to patients, which is a real key Buurtzorg thing. And the consequence of that is that nurses and care assistants spend more time driving to patients rather than getting to patients quickly, which has an impact on workforce and motivation. So there are unintended consequences for some of the other issues we're wrestling with in the NHS. As Brendan said, the title of this program was all about integration. We integrated very well with local GP surgeries. We struggled to integrate with social care, not because social care teams and businesses didn't want to integrate with us, but because of systemic issues around regulation, around insurance. The three organisations, Buurtzorg Britain and Ireland, Sue's organisation, MCH, and my organisation, I remember we had a workshop with the CQC in early 2020 it was, and I had my chief nurse there as well, and we were talking to the CQC, and they were saying, "Oh, this is a great idea. You know, we need to see more innovation like this." And we had a workshop. You know, we were all trying to talk about, you know, co-create together, which is exactly what we should be doing. And at the very end of the meeting, the CQC inspector said, "Well, of course, if I came tomorrow, legally I have to inspect under the current inspection regime. I've got no other option." And that kind of killed all of that creativity. And he's absolutely right. We need those conversations at system level. So I'm going to sort of finish by saying that I totally agree with what Sue and Brendan have said. What we need is real conversations about purpose. You know, why are we doing what we're doing at a system level? And we need those conversations so we can co-create something better than we have at the moment. You know, there is some exceptional care going on at the moment. It's not about being critical of what's happening, but I think we can do something better.
Thanks, Peter. So I'm aware that this is quite a big call. There's about 60 odd of us on this call, so it's it can be a bit daunting to type things into the chat or speak up. So I think, Jorian, we're going to break out into some breakout rooms just for a very brief while. That's to help you sort of generate some more questions, and then we're going to come back, and I have clocked the 3 or 4 questions that are already in the chat. So I'm going to hand over to Jorian to do the magic whizzy stuff and send people into breakouts.
So folks, you will be sent to groups of 3 people, and a couple of groups will have 4, but just a few. Yeah, remember to explore your curiosity. The next session is the Q&A, so we're trying to generate the best possible questions that we can to the panelists. And you have 1 minute and a half. I will send a little reminder when you have 1 minute to go. And let me open all of the breakouts. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Welcome back. And with you, Jane, once more.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Welcome back. Hope that wasn't too much of a rocky ride. It seemed fairly smooth. I don't think we've lost too many people. We're going to take some questions now. I've got a few that I've noted from the discussion thread before. If you want to add questions that came from your group into the discussion thread, that's great. Or the other thing that you can do is raise your hand, and Joy and I will do our best to spot you, and we'll just work through them as we go. So I'm going to pick some that were there from the start, if that's okay, just to get us started. And I'm going to pick one from Sarah, who unfortunately had to go, but she said, Peter, could you tell us a bit more about the rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah, so of course, so this was a campaign that like a marketing campaign effectively that we ran on our internal website, but we also, so we run some community hospitals as well and some dental surgeries, and we basically put posters up saying, tell us what gets in the way. So yeah, I suppose you could, in the sort of modern parlance, it was like a listening event, and then we did a you said we did, so we themed what came back. Quite a few things were around IT, unsurprisingly, as Sue mentioned. Quite a few things were, so just as an example, we had a recruitment system where basically if you were recruiting, you had to do you basically had to enter the information twice into 2 different systems, which was a ridiculous waste of time. We've now basically just do it once and it's automatically copied to the other system. Another really simple fix was that teams at the start of our work couldn't do their own rota, which is a key thing for Buurtzorg teams. And yeah, it was just about allowing the right permissions in the software to allow teams to do their own rotas. So it was things like that. A lot of it was very simple. A lot of it was that people couldn't get the support they needed or didn't know how to get the support they needed. So a lot of it was putting people in touch with and simplifying our processes for getting support, like, you know, for estates issues or for IT issues or even software training. So there were some major things like the improvements to recruitment and also improvements to our electronic patient record system, but a lot of it was very simple procedure changes, if you like, or just making things simpler, throwing an awful lot away. We had a huge number of policies which had gone out of date, no one had looked at, no one had reviewed, and they weren't actually reflecting the daily life of community nurses. So yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. So I'm going to pick on Alison's question next. Alison asked, in the face of challenges articulated, how important was the evidence available from the original Buurtzorg model in breaking down barriers and gaining credibility and buy-in? That sounds like maybe one for Brendan to start with, perhaps.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the question. I think the evidence from Buurtzorg's achievements, well, first of all, Buurtzorg's achievements were the inspiration for the whole project in the first place, but the particular evidence arising from how Buurtzorg had achieved what it achieved, I think formed a very important part of the of how the participants in the project learned. And I would say, going back to what I said earlier, so there's a lot of detail there. For example, we found that the Buurtzorg approach to team meetings, how team meetings are structured, how decisions are made, how everybody's involved in reaching collective decisions, but in a way that is expeditious rather than taking all day about it. We're all very experienced, I think, with consensual decision making where no decisions get made because everybody's seeking to get a consensus, rather than the Buurtzorg approach, which is really action and solution focused. So there are some specifics there which we have found are very useful to learn in particular, and which we've supported other, for example, Kent and Medway to learn and continue to do that. But more broadly, so however, I think if we get too bogged down at looking at the particulars of how Buurtzorg does its practice, you can also lose the creativity and the collective creativity that's at the bottom of it. So I find it really fascinating that Buurtzorg itself in the Netherlands continues to evolve and does so through the fundamentals of how everybody in the organization is able to experiment, explore new ways of doing things, share the lessons of those experiences with everybody else. Here, the IT system is again very useful. So I think it's a balance between taking some of the particulars, that's really important, learning how that works and seeing if it works for you, but above all, taking the fundamental mindsets beneath it, which is how can we enable people to live with as much meaning and autonomy and warm social interaction as possible. That's the fundamental purpose of Buurtzorg. What does that mean for the professional freedom and responsibility of the nurses and other caregivers that are supporting people to do that in their communities? And what does that mean for organizational change to support those professionals? I think those are the key lessons. And so the creativity with which Buurtzorg goes about that, I would say, is the most important evidential aspect of Buurtzorg's experience to draw upon.
Thanks, Brendan. Again, just keeping a track on the chat thread. A lot of people are asking about the report. There's some links gone in there, but you will get an email as well with links to the report and the information. So just to let you know that. Amanda has got a question. Oh, sorry, Lynn. If you do just one thing as the first stepping stone, what would it be to get into this model? And I'm going to pick on Sue for that one. Just one thing. What would you do?
One thing that I have no impact on is our current workforce, but no one's got any impact on that at the moment. So one thing that's really important, I think, within organisations is to get exec sponsorship for it at board level. So I was fortunate. I had my chief nurse who was very much engaged with the projects as well. So she was my exec sponsorship, and she gave sort of permission. There's a role that they use in Buurtzorg called the heat shield or the fire guard, I always like to call it. So the job very much is about challenging the status quo and being quite challenging. So that enabled me, and they got used to me with the other directors and ADs and services being very challenging of why we're doing and what we're doing it. And is this the simplest way of doing it? Or should we be doing it? So I think that's one of the key to make sure that you've got good exec support to take forward.
Thanks, Sue. That's really helpful. Jill, I'm hoping that some of the answers that we're getting already are answering your question about which bits of the Buurtzorg model people have been able to adopt and which ones have not been so successful. I'm going to leap into Dave's question about key measures which were used to measure progress and improvement. Would anybody like to share anything about those, please?
I can share some things. So across each team we tracked sickness absence over time, sickness absence due to stress, reduction in turnover, reduction in complaints, reduction in number of patient incidents, increase in patient surveys being completed, and reduction in patient incidents. And we had really strong results in all of those categories. And what we did is we benchmarked the teams, so before engagement and after engagement. So we could see there was a difference. And as Brendan said, this was an incredibly challenging time because we were doing this whilst COVID was going on. So, but we we benchmarked to isolate as much as possible any other factors. And so yeah, we track those at team level. There were other wider measures to do with tick as well. But I can see the massive impact this project had on our team well-being and on individual staff well-being. Yeah, it allowed staff to talk in a way they've never talked before about why they chose to be a community nurse or why they chose to be a healthcare worker. They'd never had that opportunity. No one had even asked them. Yeah, and quite often, I mean, I had a team working with me and facilitators, and quite often it was you just saw this sort of, I don't know what the correct way to put it is, but there's just this amazing outpouring of motivation and desire and positivity. So there's just all this untapped potential that's in the system. You know, people have got these amazing ideas and they have nowhere to go with them.
If I can just add one other thing that we did find was we actually reduced the length of stay of patients on our caseload. That was through the more holistic approach and using the self-management approach, and it quite significantly reduced length of stay on caseload with good outcomes for patients, which is obviously quite key with the capacity and demand currently in the system.
Thank you for that. I'm thinking that maybe links to a question around empowering practitioners. There's one here from Claire about how you shift that culture to empower practitioners to work in that way. It sounds when I listen to you, Sue and Peter, that the empowerment happens maybe as part of the overall approach, but I'd be interested to know any more detailed responses to that.
Yeah, so we worked with Buurtzorg very closely at the start of the project, and they did direct work with pilot teams for us, and they were talking about purpose. So we slightly adapted that, and we used a team canvas approach, but very much based on the principles of Buurtzorg. So we used a team canvas approach, which is basically all about, you know, what's the purpose of the team? What assets do we have as a team? What goals do we want to achieve as a team? What, you know, where are our interfaces as a team? You know, how do people judge us as a team? We use things like a team charter, which come direct from Buurtzorg. We used there's an assessment, a team assessment in I don't know. I can never remember the title of the book. Brendan will be able to remember. It's basically a blue book about Buurtzorg, and there's a suggested team assessment, and it's a self-assessment. The idea is that teams ask themselves these questions. So we use that quite a lot to help teams get into a reflective space of how things might be better for them and better for their patients. The final thing, I suppose, is there's a framework. So if you like, what that is, it's a quasi contract between this autonomous team and the organisation, and it's a simple 2-page plain English. These are our expectations as a team, and these are our expectations as the organisation. And it just, again, it's just trying to simplify things, take an awful lot of bureaucracy and an awful lot of sort of, I don't know, noise out of the situation and provide more headspace to actually care for people.
Just to build on what Peter said, I think some of it's about accountability as well. So in terms of with making smaller teams with their caseloads and enabling them to be more accountable, they don't feel that they need to ask everyone everything all the time, that they are accountable for their patients and making their teams work. And that had some interesting spin-offs in the pandemic when staff were really stretched, because before we knew it, they were doing things they would never have done if we had brought them in as edicts, like working split shifts, like working very odd hours, but to make sure they took very great accountability for their patients under their care, because it was that continuity of care rather than having we lost some of the boundaries in some of our teams when they were going all over and there wasn't that continuity of care. So they now take much more ownership for how they perform and the outcomes of their patients.
Thank you, Sue. Maybe another one for you, Sue, actually, is did you still have to do standard assessments?
Yes, we do have standard assessments, but a lot of them have been adjusted or made simpler. And with some of them, I'm just trying to think of one in general. So sometimes we get things come down in that you need, so you talk assessments, I presume they're talking about nursing assessments, are they core assessments? I presume that's
It
what it's
doesn't
talking
say.
about.
John, do you want to clarify that for us?
Yeah, just quickly, very often when you visit someone or you sit with someone, you have an assessment sheet to fill in. You might have other assessment sheets to fill in. Other professionals will come in with their own assessments. So the reality from a patient's perspective is that they've come across multiple assessments and the information is very often split. And that very often creates a barrier between you actually trying to understand the patient instead of having to do all the tick boxes.
Yes, one of the things we are using EPR, and obviously one of the design purposes of that, which was implemented in the pandemic, which was a really good idea, was actually that we only record evidence once, what information once, that it doesn't matter which team you're in, it's only recorded once, because we know that causes breakdown because patients have no trust in that, because we're all asking them the same question time. So we had to design our system so the information is only ever recorded once. That doesn't help with the external organisations, obviously, because they're on different systems. But the assessments, we tried to move away being prescriptive. We had quite a bit of discussion sometimes. You must do this and you must do that and you must do that and something else. But actually the clinicians are very knowledgeable and capable about what's relevant in terms of assessment for their patients. And we need to put that clinical judgment back into practice and not be so prescriptive as perhaps has been done in the past. In some ways, I think we've gone overly into defensive medicine, which doesn't help anyone because it just eats up capacity and actually doesn't prove any benefit to the patients.
Thanks, Sue. I'm going to leap to a question here. It feels like quite a big question here, Hisham, in terms of asking how do you change, how do you influence the system when you're part of the system yourself? So I don't know which lucky person should I pick on with this one. This sounds like a Brendan question to pick on first, I reckon.
Thank you, Jane. Really nice. Of course, that is in many ways, that's the fundamental challenge that we had in this project and that we have continually in all of the work that we're doing in Buurtzorg, Britain and Ireland to support change. And it's the paradox we're dealing with all the time. As Peter mentioned, Buurtzorg had the advantage in some ways of being a startup social enterprise, but they were still working within a system with all its constraints. I think that there's a real lesson for us about this topic from how Buurtzorg has evolved over the last 16 years. It started itself with one team of 4. It was conceived, the whole project was conceived around a kitchen table. One team then started, and the way in which Buurtzorg has expanded has been through other teams joining it, saying to Buurtzorg, oh, we like the way you work, can we set up a team in our village because there isn't one now? Or one of the ground rules in the Buurtzorg framework is that when a team gets to 12 in size, it needs to divide, and so it divides into 2 teams. And that's how that first team has organically grown to 950 teams today with more than 10,000 nurses. And indeed, Buurtzorg itself has grown other smaller organizations. Alongside that practical work, however, has been a continual process of drawing on the lessons of experience to try to successfully, in fact, in the Netherlands, influence the regulatory regime, the institutional arrangements of the insurers through which health and care is funded in the Netherlands. Oh, can you hear that? Lovely thunder. And other systemic and organizational contextual changes, to draw upon the practical support to show this is what we can do even within these constraints. Imagine what we could do if those constraints were not there. So I don't see it as a question, and I've had a reasonably a lively-ish discussion with those who say trying to bring Buurtzorg into Britain has been a failure because you have to start with system change. My argument to that is, if you go about system change in the same way as the system itself, in a top-down way, you're not going to actually be solving the problem. To paraphrase Myron Rogers, probably very badly, the route by which you try to get to your destination is actually determining the destination you get to. So I think the Buurtzorg experience of practically trying things out, doing things, using whatever space is already within the system to try to create new ways of doing it. And by doing that, showing the lessons of experience that needs to change the organizational, the institutional, and the systemic environment. That's what Buurtzorg has succeeded in doing. And I think that's the way we need to go about it in Britain too.
Thank you, Brendan. Peter, you've got something to add here as well, I think.
Yeah, I'm just going to speak positively about some of the changes that are going on in the NHS, which I don't always do. But I think health and care partnerships have got a big part to play in creating the joint purpose, but also creating the space for this innovation to happen. So I do agree with Brendan. It has to be community focused. It is about community, caring for community, and not taking away from the assets that patients have, and you know, the diverse sort of support there is out there in our communities. But it also has to be at that top level as well, and we have to find a way of both working in harmony. But I think we've probably got the best chance for a generation to make some really positive and significant changes.
Thank you, Peter. I'm aware of time, and I'm aware of some exciting stuff happening in the thread where I think we're suggesting that there might be a future discussion with a GP practice that looks like it's thinking about heading down this route. And I think we've also got some other people on the call that are interested in if I want to pursue this, what do I do? So that sounds, Matthew and Jorian, like another conversation maybe to pull together. I'd really like to thank our speakers. It's been really generous of you to give us your time, and great to be able to ask you lots of questions. I wonder if we could maybe ask you perhaps a final thought, a summing up thought each. Who should I start with? I should start with Sue, I think.
My final thoughts are, I think unless something radically changes within the NHS, particularly with the way with their nursing workforce, they won't have a nursing workforce, because they really need to understand they are autonomous practitioners. They want to care for their patients. They don't want to be tied to computers and PCs and filling in spreadsheets. So releasing time to care is really important. And I'm a great believer. We know from the model of my staff that are working in it, and those where we get the model right, they stay, they're engaged, retention rates are good. They are not leaving in the droves as they did in the most recent years.
Something significant to note there, I think. Peter, some final thoughts?
Yeah, so complementing what Sue said, hopefully it's a partnership with patients. You know, I've had the pleasure of talking to a number of patients who've shared their experiences in, you know, really meaningful experiences. You know, patients who were caring for a significant other who's died, and then they've become a patient, and just the way they felt respected, cared for, supported. That's what it's about, isn't it? It's about patients and about enabling patients to make the choices they want.
Thank you, Peter. And Brendan, we've not left you a lot of time, but final thoughts.
For me, my final thought is that we need to trust in the creativity, the knowledge, and the ability to find solutions of people in communities themselves. And by communities, I mean not just place-based communities, but also workplace communities. If we create the conditions and support the relationships needed to grow solutions, those solutions will emerge. And we need to be highly consistent about doing that. The temptation always is to see systemic change as something that organizational leaders need to do, and then create another set of structures for the professionals with the best of intentions to fit into. I think the lesson for leadership is really to create the conditions for the knowledge to be grown and mobilized from the people who really have it, which is in the communities served and in the professionals that serve them.
Thank you, Brendan. And thank you all again. I'm aware that people will need to leap off at any minute. Matthew, Joram, I understand that we're going to email people with links to the various things and maybe even links to future sessions that we're planning. Have I missed anything before people need to go?
Yeah, my last invitation would be please join the Reimagining Health and Care Special Interest Group. I just put the link in the chat there. And any future updates that will not be ready when we send you this email will always go over there. So that is the hub for all this information. Thank you very much for attending, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all.